Meeting for the 34th time at the Copa America. Argentina with the better overall head-to-head record, 15 wins to Brazil's 10, but in the 7 previous games between them in the Copa played in Brazil.
July 10th, 2021. The 47th iteration of the Copa America has reached its final game. On one side, the hosts and current champions, Brazil, looking to win back-to-back titles, remain undefeated at home, and beat their biggest rivals yet again. On the other side, Argentina, playing in their 5th final out of the last 7 Copa Americas, once again led by the impeccable Lionel Messi. It's a 0-0 tie, but that is about to change. As the clock ticks over to the 22nd minute, a brilliant pass from Argentine midfielder Rodrigo de Paul lands at the feet of Ángel Di María, and
¡ahí está Di María!
But this moment was more than just a goal. This is more than just a moment of a ball hitting the back of the net in a stadium of near empty fans. No, this is a moment with nearly 3 decades of history behind it. Argentina's last international title came back in 1993. I wasn't even born yet, but I can tell you it was a rather ugly tournament for the Albiceleste. In their opening game of the group stage, they beat Bolivia by a score of only 1-0. Not great, but a win is a win. However, they would draw both of their next 2 group stage games against Mexico and Colombia, tying both 1-1. This led Argentina to finish 2nd in their group, and they would have to face rivals Brazil in the quarterfinal. For their 3rd straight game, Argentina would tie 1-1 and would only win on penalties. So after 4 games played, Argentina had never managed to score more than a single goal or win more than a single game. Now, one thing that is very important to all this is to understand that the Copa America has a strange format. South America only has 10 official FIFA members, and despite the tournament starting in 1916, it wouldn't be until 1975, 59 years later, that all 10 countries would participate. This led to some very weird formatting throughout the years, and various attempts were made to figure out how exactly to format this tournament, some more successful than others, and there being really no consistency in the tournament at all. 1993 was no exception, as it was the very first time teams from outside CONMEBOL were allowed to participate. In an effort to round out the format to a full 12 teams, the United States and Mexico were both invited to play. Having 12 teams is better than 10, but when it comes to the knockout stages, it still doesn't divide evenly. So in the group stage, not only do the top 2 teams from each group advance, but also the 2 best 3rd place teams. This messes with the seeding of the knockout stages quite a bit, so long story short, Argentina had to face Colombia in the semifinal again. Remember, they played them in the 3rd group stage game, so this is the 2nd time in the same tournament that they had to play each other. And just like the first one, this would also be played to a draw, where Argentina would once again win on penalties. So if you're still keeping track, that means that out of the 5 games played before the final, Argentina won 1 and then proceeded to tie 4 straight games. In fact, the only good, if you can call it that, game that Argentina played in 1993 was the final against Mexico, once again having to play the same opponent twice in the same tournament. However, this time, 2 second-half goals from Batistuta were enough to push Argentina over the top, securing their 2nd straight title and their 14th overall. But it would be their last one for quite a while. Argentina would struggle through the next few tournaments and would actually have to withdraw from the 2001 edition due to threats of terrorism. But in 2004, Argentina would make it back to the final, and this time they had a much better tournament. They would absolutely destroy Ecuador 6-1 in their very first game, with 4 goals coming in the last 15 minutes. But an early goal from Mexico in the second game was all that it would take, and Argentina would surprisingly lose 1-0. With a win absolutely needed in their final game, they would play Uruguay, and Argentina would come out ahead 4-2, with 2 goals coming in the last 10 minutes. It was clear that they were wearing down opponents and relying on those late goals to win. But that loss to Mexico did cause Argentina to finish second in their group again, but they would get a little lucky this time and have to face Peru in the quarterfinals. Argentina actually played a really good game here, and after some unlucky misses, a free kick goal from Carlitos Tevez in the 60th minute was more than enough to win, setting up a match against Colombia in the semi-final. Here, the Albiceleste would cruise by in a 3-0 win, easily one of their best games of the entire tournament. Basically, Argentina was doing very well, and they were set to face Brazil in the final. And you know what's really interesting about this 2004 edition of the Copa America? Is that technically, this was the very first time Argentina and Brazil would ever face off in a final. Things would start off well for Argentina. A penalty in the 20th minute gave them the lead, but at the stroke of halftime, Brazil would equalize. The game would remain this way until Argentina did what they had done all tournament long, and they would score a late goal in the 87th minute, taking the lead, and surely, 11 years after their last win, they'd raise the trophy again. But sadly, in the 3rd minute of stoppage time, Brazil would tie. This game would go to penalties, where Brazil would go on to win. For Argentina fans, it was devastating. To be so close to beating their biggest rival in the final, only to lose, was hard to handle. But Argentina had a really good squad, so they would definitely be back. It didn't take long at all. Since Brazil won the 2002 World Cup and the 2004 Copa America, Argentina was invited to play in the Confederations Cup in 2005. In their group stage games, they would win against both Tunisia and Australia before tying Germany. And once again, that tie was enough for Argentina to finish second in their group, causing them to face an all too familiar foe in the semi-final, Mexico. On a side note here, it's insane how much Argentina and Mexico have actually played each other in official tournaments. And this time they tied, and once again Argentina would win in penalties. So for the second time in 2 years, they'd face Brazil in the final. And there's not really an easy way to put this, but Argentina was no match this time around. Brazil would cruise to an easy 4-1 win. So for the second time in 2 years, Argentina would lose in the final to their biggest rival. But not all was lost, as there was a little hope. And he came in the name of Lionel Andres Messi, El Segundo Maradona as he was called back then, the little man, the wonder kid. While some may say it's debatable who the best player in the world is, to me personally, there is no debate. He is. Shortly after the loss in the Confederations Cup, as in literally 3 days later, Argentina's youth team, led by Messi, was playing in the final of the Under-20 World Cup. Unlike one could argue for the senior squad, the youth squad was not there by any accident. Despite losing their first game to the United States, Argentina would go on to beat Egypt, Germany, Colombia, and Spain before facing who else but Brazil in the semi-final. And one could say that Argentina would win in a revengeful manner. Messi scored first to take the lead in only the 7th minute of the game, and they would hold that until the 75th when Brazil tied. Argentina did score another goal shortly thereafter, but it was wrongfully disallowed. Keep in mind, this was at a time before VAR or goal line technology. But like Brazil had done the year before, Argentina would score in the 3rd minute of stoppage time to win the game and move on to the final. And remember, this game against Brazil happened the day before the senior squad would lose 4-1 in the Confederations Cup. So while that loss absolutely stung, it was easy to believe that there was hope for the future. Yeah, the senior squad did just lose for the second time in a row, but the youth squad at the time was filled with names like Gunaguero, Gago, Zabaleta, and Garay, alongside Messi of course, and not only were they playing very well, but they just beat the team the senior squad couldn't. And then, 3 days after the loss to Brazil in the Confederations Cup, the youth squad would beat Nigeria 2-1 in the final. Now, for most of the players that I just listed, it would be a few years until they joined the senior squad, but for Messi, it was immediately after the tournament in a friendly against Hungary, and let's just say it didn't really go well. But despite that, he was called up to play in the World Cup the following year in Germany, while he sat out in the 2-1 victory over the Ivory Coast in Argentina's opening group stage game. He did come in as a second half substitute against Serbia and Montenegro in the following match. Another interesting fact is that at the time they were one country and this game actually influenced the decision to split, but that's a different story. When Messi came on, they were already winning 3-0 with all 3 goals scored in the first half and spent most of the second half just going through the motions. However, after he came on, that changed. He almost immediately set up a 4th goal, and then right before the end of the game would actually score his first ever World Cup goal. Even then, even with such a simple goal, people knew that he was going to be something special. And after playing a tight game against Mexico, only winning when Maxi Rodriguez scored the goal of the tournament, Argentina would eventually fall to host Germany in the quarterfinal. But to this day, many people think they would have won it all had they won that game. They were just that good, and many people question why Messi was never substituted in. And with players like him joining the team, the expectations were very high. Keep in mind, in the season following the World Cup, Messi would score a hat-trick against Real Madrid and this absolute wonder goal against Getafe.
Messi, 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 immens Messi, encara 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 Messi, gol, 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 gol.
So when you have a star like that on your team, in addition to players like Carlitos Tevez, Mascherano, Hernan Crespo, Ayala, El Pato Boningeri, Zanetti, and of course Juan Roman Riquelme, the expectations of success for the team are absolutely unimaginable. So despite the losses in both 2004 and 5, and the early exit from the 2006 World Cup, there was plenty of reason to believe the 2007 Copa America would be different. 2007 was one of the better tournaments Argentina played. They would start with a very solid 4-1 win over the United States, and then follow it up with a 4-2 win over Colombia, before finishing their group stage by beating Paraguay 1-0. So finally, they didn't finish second and would actually top their group, so they would play Peru in the quarterfinal. This round of quarterfinals was probably the most lopsided the Copa America has ever seen. The smallest margin of victory was Uruguay's 4-1 defeat over Venezuela. Both Brazil and Mexico would put 6 past their opponents, and Argentina strolled to a 4-0 win, with all 4 goals in the second half. So this once again set up Argentina to play Mexico. I mean, seriously, Argentina played Mexico in official tournaments in 1993 twice, and then in 2004, 5, 6, and 7. And that's just official tournaments, that's not counting friendlies. But this game in 2007 was a little different. They were certainly familiar sides with many of the players from the year before still on the teams, but both had also just come off of games where they destroyed their opponents. This game was bound to be intense and probably high scoring, but in the end, Argentina was clearly the better side, winning 3-0, including this golazo from Messi, and sending a very solid statement. This was their year. They were ready. There was only one game left to win, and in it, for the third straight final, Argentina had to face Brazil. In contrast to Argentina, Brazil had a less than stellar tournament. They actually lost to Mexico and ended second in their group. Argentina easily beating the team that already beat Brazil was huge and definitely said something. Especially since in the semi-final, Brazil tied Uruguay 2-2 and only won on penalties. In the third place game, Mexico would beat Uruguay 3-1. So if Argentina easily beat Mexico, and they did, and Mexico easily beat the team that Brazil couldn't win against, then surely Argentina would be able to beat Brazil, right? Or at the very least be competitive? Yeah, the final wasn't even close. Despite the tremendous performance throughout the tournament, Argentina just fell apart. They gave up a goal in only the 4th minute of play and never recovered. Brazil would win 3-0, humiliating Argentina for the 3rd time in the last 4 years. Remember a few segments ago when I brought up some youth players and I said they had a few more years to go still? While the senior squad was playing the Copa America, they were once again fighting for the Under-20 World Cup, and they would win it again, becoming back-to-back champions. Also, I just need to point out that they had to face Mexico again in the quarterfinal. Every single name I mentioned earlier would play in the 2008 Summer Olympics. This team was absolutely stacked. Joining Messi, Agüero, Gago, Garay, and Zabaleta were some notable players such as Ever Banega, Ezequiel Lavezzi, Sergio Romero, and one Angel Di Maria. Not to jump ahead in the timeline here, but 8 of those guys would play in the World Cup final just 6 years later. Also in the Olympics, some senior level players are allowed, and so they were joined by the likes of Mascherano and of course Riquelme. This team was unbeatable. No, literally. In the 3 group stage games, Argentina would give up only a single goal. Their toughest match actually came against the Netherlands in the quarterfinal, where they would win in extra time 2-1. And all of this led to another familiar matchup. Not Mexico. No, Argentina would face Brazil in the semi-final. While looking back all these years later at the Argentina squad, it's easy to see just how much talent they had, but the same can easily be said for the Brazilian side, as they had players like Marcelo, Thiago Silva, Rafinha, Diego Alves, and of course were led by none other than Ronaldinho. It was a rather tight game to start with, as both teams had plenty of chances throughout the first half, and they would end up going into halftime tied 0-0. Early into the second half though, Kun Agüero would score to give Argentina their first lead against Brazil since 2004. And 6 minutes later, he would double the lead with a second goal. But Brazil were not quite out of the game yet. They would actually score only 5 minutes after that, but it was offside and correctly disallowed. As they kept trying to get back into the game and had some really good chances to do so, they ended up giving up a penalty in the 73rd minute. Riquelme, not one to miss a chance at some flair, would calmly push it straight down the middle, putting the cherry on top of a 3-0 revenge win. It was not a pretty game for Brazil. They actually had 2 red cards in it, but for Argentina, it almost felt like payback for the year before. Almost. Not only was there still the final to play, but the Olympics just aren't the same as the Copa America, and none of it would mean anything if they didn't win the gold. And in the gold medal match, these youth players faced a familiar foe in Nigeria. This time around, the game was certainly much tighter than in 2005. Once again tied 0-0 at halftime, the deadlock was only broken in the 58th minute when Messi, of all players, would find an open Angel Di Maria who audaciously chipped it over the keeper, ultimately winning the game. And it really seemed like despite the shortcomings of the senior squad, the young players were bound to bring glory back to Argentina. After all, they had just won the last 3 tournaments they played in. But transitions are never easy. In what could honestly only be described as a bout of jealousy, Riquelme decided he wasn't going to play international games anymore, causing Argentina to not only lose one of their best players, but a leader they desperately needed. And in the coming years, they would also lose players like Saviola, Sorin, Crespo, Pato, basically anyone with experience. So this left Argentina as extremely talented, but still very young. And even when being coached by the great Diego Maradona, they'd struggle to even qualify for the 2010 World Cup. Ultimately, they would barely make it in, have a decent group stage, play Mexico yet again, and lose to Germany in humiliating fashion. Maradona would be out, and Batista, the same man who coached Argentina to the gold medal in 2008, would take over the role. The team just didn't work. The 2011 Copa America, which was held in Argentina and host advantage is definitely a thing, would end poorly as Argentina played horrible. They only won a single game before losing to eventual champions Uruguay in the quarterfinal. And after that disappointment, Argentina would get yet another new coach. This one was Sabella, and he would really start to change things. Under him, Argentina started to become the soccer powerhouse that the world knows them to be. They cruised through qualifying for the 2014 World Cup and really seemed to have a diverse ability to win games. They were equally capable of winning by several goals as they were of holding on to 1-0 leads, something which became extremely apparent in the 2014 World Cup. Expectations were astronomical as Argentina was given a rather easy group where they would have to play the likes of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Iran, and once again, Nigeria. Okay, I have a hill to die on here. I think Argentina's play throughout this tournament is extremely misunderstood and underrated. There's this idea that because Argentina is a soccer powerhouse, they should be winning these games easily by multiple goals. There was this expectation that they would beat Bosnia by 5 or 6-0, so when they barely scraped by with a 2-1 win, people were easily upset. Given it wasn't a great performance, but high-scoring games aren't indicative of a great championship-level team either. In 2010, Portugal beat North Korea 7-0, but still finished second in the group and lost in the round of 16. See, against Bosnia, Argentina took the lead in the second minute thanks to an own goal, and there was never really a point after that where Bosnia threatened, well, anything. They certainly had chances, but Argentina always responded well and had as many chances of their own. Once Messi scored the second goal, the plan was more focused on securing the win and less on scoring more. But the game people really hate on Argentina for is the one against Iran. If you listen to any of the commentary for Messi's 90th minute game-winning goal, almost every single one talks about how bad Argentina played.
Messi surely just sent Argentina unconvincingly, it has to be said.
La Argentina no mereció nunca ganar este partido.
But that's just not true. They weren't playing champagne football, but they weren't playing bad. In fact, Argentina played a very good game for the first 75 to 80 minutes. They had several extremely good chances and would have easily scored with just a tiny bit more of luck. Not to mention that the Iranian goalie played the game of his life that day. It was only in the last 10 minutes or so when Argentina became desperate for a win and started making some mistakes and desperation plays that they really weren't playing their best. Equally though, no one ever gives credit to just how good of a game Iran actually played. People don't think of them as a soccer nation, but this is the same team who would almost beat Portugal and Spain 4 years later. In 2014 against Argentina, Iran had no intention to win that game, only to not lose. Look where they are when Messi scores his goal. Literally all 11 Iranian players are inside the box, and you tell me how anyone is supposed to play against that for 90 straight minutes. But Messi's goal was enough to secure Argentina a place in the round of 16. All they had to do was not lose to Nigeria in the final game and they would top the group. And this is the game where Argentina did not play well. People don't really say that because they scored 3 and still won, but Nigeria would be the only team to score more than 1 goal against Argentina, and both were extremely preventable. Thankfully though, Argentina did still come out on top, and they would learn a lot from this, as for the next 3 games, they'd not give up a single goal. In the round of 16, they would face Switzerland in a game that really should have been decided in 90, but it would take a goal from Angel Di Maria in the 118th minute, and the blessing of a post, for Argentina to win. An early goal against Belgium in the quarterfinal proved enough, and in the semifinal, this tackle from Mascherano absolutely saved the game, before Romero saves would win it. So for the first time in 24 years, since 1990, Argentina was back in the World Cup final, and the last time they made it, it was against West Germany, where they would lose 1-0 in an extremely controversial penalty given late in the game. Here, Messi would have a chance to win it all for his country, end this miserable losing streak, and crown his already stellar career. Not only that though, Brazil, who I remind you were host of the World Cup that year, were absolutely humiliated in their semi-final, losing 7-1 to Germany. While that is easily one of the worst moments in Brazilian soccer history and will never be forgotten, Argentina winning the World Cup in their own backyard would have been 1,000 times worse. No amount of stars on your jersey means anything when your biggest rival has one they earned in your own home. Despite having plenty of chances, and I mean plenty, and what definitely should have been a penalty, Argentina would ultimately rue their misses as a single moment of brilliance from Germany led to the only goal of the game. Yet again, Argentina would fall short, and it really seemed like they were cursed. Many would say they were the better side in the final, playing a very defensive game, but almost always in control. Basically, doing to Germany what Iran had done to them. The 7-1 thrashing in the semi-final didn't just show people Brazil's weakness, but also Germany's strengths. So Argentina made a game plan against it. It didn't matter how much space the Germans had if they couldn't do anything with it. But some questionable substitutions left their attack lacking, as did some noticeable absentees. We'll come back to him. Before the World Cup final, Sabella had already announced he'd retire from his position, regardless of the outcome, something I personally wish he had waited to say until after the game, as it kind of made it seem like he was giving up on the team. And with him leaving, the carousel of coaches began. Next up was someone who was quite familiar with Messi, Tata Martino, who had coached Barcelona for the 2014 season. And while many people pointed to this familiarity saying it would help Argentina, it's not like Martino had done particularly well. He failed to win any major trophies for Barcelona except the Spanish Super Cup. And to make matters even worse, when he got replaced at Barcelona the next year, they had one of their best seasons ever. With help from Messi, they'd win not only La Liga, but they'd also win the Copa del Rey, where Messi scored probably the single best solo goal in Copa del Rey final history, and they'd put the cherry on top with a 3-1 win over Juventus in the Champions League final, securing their second ever treble. In 2015, Messi was easily at the peak of his game, so when the Copa America rolled around yet again, people knew exactly what he could do. After having finished second best the year before, Argentina was determined to win. It was almost expected. But Martino's troubles as coach proved to carry over to the national side. They would top their group, but it came in less than spectacular fashion. In their opening game, Argentina had a 2-0 lead against Paraguay, but would lose all control and almost lose the game, but thankfully it ended 2-2. And then Argentina would beat both Jamaica and Uruguay by the minimal margin. Despite having plenty of chances, they would struggle to score against Colombia in the quarterfinal, and it has to be said, this game had the single worst refereeing performance that I have ever seen. Despite so many obvious fouls, he did not call anything. For either team, he was at least consistent. But the problem is that Colombia's play is always very physical. There were several moments that not only should a foul have been called, but maybe a card or two. And it's interesting because there is literally no information available about this referee, and I think that's for a reason. But Argentina would win on penalties, and then in the semi-final, they'd face Paraguay once again, but this time they would destroy them quite easily 6-1. So it did seem like there was an improvement, from tying the first game 2-2 to completely dominating the second time around. All of this meant Argentina was back in the final for the second straight year, and this time they didn't have to play Brazil. They would actually play host Chile, who honestly did not deserve to be there. Some unsportsmanlike conduct from Chile somehow led to Uruguay being a man down. In the era of VAR, they don't get away with that. But VAR didn't exist, they did get away with it, and they did make it to the final. Surely though, this would be the time for Argentina. They were so close against Germany just a year before, and Chile was definitely no Germany. With Messi playing at his absolute best, it just had to be, right? No. This is a Chilean squad that bested defending champion Spain and were mere feet away from eliminating Brazil as well. They may not have deserved to be in the final conduct-wise, but absolutely did deserve to be there from their play. So the two sides would play to a 0-0 draw despite some good chances from both teams and yet another miss from Higuain. However, one of the biggest factors of this game were the injuries Argentina faced throughout. In the second half of the game, Ezequiel Lavezzi, one of Argentina's best attacking players, faced hamstring issues and unfortunately, with no substitutions left, had to keep playing. This meant that when the game went to penalties, he couldn't go. Chilean goalkeeper Bravo is also one of the best goalkeepers out there, especially when it comes to penalties. In the shootout, both teams would both score their first shot, and Chile would take the lead with their second goal, so needing to score to keep things level, up-stepped Gonzalo Higuain for his one and only penalty he ever took for Argentina. Well, Chile scored again, so up-stepped Banega, absolutely needing to score. Yeah, Argentina would lose 4-1 on penalties, and they would lose in back-to-back finals yet again, and for the 5th straight final played. Alright, I need to give you a not-so-quick history of the Copa America here. It is the longest-running soccer tournament in the world, outdating the World Cup by 14 years in fact. It's also been the least consistent tournament. For instance, the World Cup has always been held every 4 years, and plans to change that have been met with extreme backlash. But when the Copa America started in 1916, it was originally played every single year. It didn't have all 10 teams as it does now, and for a very long time it was played in a round-robin style. Everyone played everyone. Then, after the World Cup was introduced, there was no Copa America between 1930 and 1934, starting again in 1935, but this time the tournament switched to being played every 2 years. Until 1941, as they'd play again in 42 and then take 2 more years off. Tournaments were then played again in 45, 46, 47, and in 1959, they actually played the tournament twice. There is literally no consistency in when the Copa America will be played, how many teams are going to be in it, what the format will be, or anything. It is the weirdest tournament in the world, and I am all for it. So all of this to say, despite having the Copa America in 2015, a special edition was planned for 2016 to celebrate the 100th anniversary. El Copa America Centenario would be held in the United States and be host to 16 teams, more teams than any other edition. Martino was still in charge of the Albiceleste, but this time they were a completely different team. One big difference is right before the tournament though, Messi suffered a minor injury, meaning he would miss the opening game against Chile. Without Messi, Argentina needed a different game plan, and it worked. With nearly identical goals from Di Maria and Banega, Argentina would take a 2-0 lead early in the second half. Chile would get one back in the 93rd minute though, but it was an otherwise solid win, even without Messi. The next game against Panama was something. Argentina started the game without Messi again, and they still managed to score an early goal. And just like Iran in 2014, Panama did not come out with any expectation to win the game. But they also didn't come out to play. With no offense meant to Panama or its fans, the only thing they came out to do that day was hit and foul. So much so, they got a red card in the first half. But in all fairness, they were being completely outmatched. Even if it did mean that the first 60 minutes of the game were an absolute slog. But in the 60th minute, Lionel Messi was substituted on, and he changed everything. Only 7 minutes after coming on, he'd score his first goal, follow it up with a free kick goal, and finish it off with not only a hat-trick, but basically an assist. In the 30 minutes he played, Messi directly attributed to 4 goals, completely rewriting the script. Without Messi, Argentina was still very good, but with him, they were unstoppable. In their final group stage game, they'd once again cruise past Bolivia 3-0 with all 3 goals coming in the first half. And if you're counting, that means that in the 3 games, Argentina had 10 goals for and only 1 against. And the knockout stages would be no different. They'd easily beat Venezuela 4-1, and it wasn't even a competition. Argentina was in full control of that game from start to finish. In the semi-final, they'd play the hosts, the United States, and if you've been paying attention, Argentina doesn't have the best record when it comes to playing the hosts. While fans of the Albiceleste were confident, people were a little worried about this game, as the United States at the time was not a bad team. But any worry vanished quickly when Ezequiel Lavezzi would score in the 2nd minute of the game, setting the tone. Messi would then double the lead with one of the best free kick goals ever scored. And while Argentina did add on 2 more goals in the second half, sending them through to their 3rd straight final in as many years, it did come with some complications. In the second half, Lavezzi would trip out of bounds and break his arm, once again causing Argentina to lose a huge attacking presence. One of the biggest reasons Argentina was even able to play without Messi in those first few games was thanks to players like him, Kun Agüero, and Di Maria. In fact, substituting Lavezzi out of the World Cup final in 2014 was probably the single biggest tactical mistake made. Not having him was worrisome, especially because for the 2nd year in a row, they were playing Chile. Over these 2 years, this Chilean side was great. It's really hard to say they didn't deserve to be in the final this time around, as they did thrash Mexico 7-0 after all, but I'm still upset they won. So I have to point out this penalty awarded in the 10th minute of stoppage time against Bolivia. The game should not have reached that point. It should have been over and ended in a 1-1 tie. Had it done so, Chile would have gone into their final group stage game with only a single point, needing to beat Panama and have Argentina win as well. Which absolutely would have happened. Chile did win their final game 4-2, but that penalty helped ensure that they did go through and ultimately set up the final. Facing their 3rd final in 3 years though, Argentina was hellbent on winning. And they played well, both teams did actually. Argentina was even given a bit of an advantage when Chile went down to 10 men early on, only for Marcos Rojo to be given a direct card for a play that absolutely did not deserve one. I'm still trying to figure that one out, and I know I'm biased, but that's not a red. Coincidentally, the only thing this Brazilian referee is known for is this game. He has 0 other credits in any other big games. But despite all of that, Argentina arguably had the best chance of the game midway through the first half when Higuaín found himself one-on-one against Bravo. Okay, no, I need to stop and rant here. If you want to know why Argentina lost 3 straight finals, it's because of this man. After this game, Higuaín should never have played for the national team again. He should never have put on the jersey again. And it's actually insane that he did. Fans didn't want him, nobody did. You know, players on a team put in a lot of work to try hard and do everything that they can. When they put on that jersey, they understand they are not just playing for themselves, but not Higuaín. No, he was the one player who found the I in team. In 2014, he had 2 huge chances for Argentina. He missed a one-on-one chance that he didn't even get on net, and you have to at least get the shot on goal there, but then he actually scored and was offside because he ran too soon.
But they were a bit open.
Yep. Higuaín he's had an interesting first half.
Well, he had the best chance before that, and just bore it, Mascherano had made a great tackle there. And the counter-attack, it takes about 3 days to get it under control, and then, you know, that's just a bit of a waste of time. And then he has, you know, it's a gift to a chance. Cruz back header, he's onto it, but again, he's slow, pedestrian, laborious.
I think when it bounces up, Alan, I don't know about you in that situation, just nudge it forward with your head and make the chance much easier.
Well, it's set up really well for him. He's got the option to take it on if he wants to, but because it's so nice to hit, and it's an absolute sitter. You want one of them. You dream about one of them. I don't think he needs to go so early here.
Yeah.
He needs to just check his run 2 or 3 yards. It's a very, very good ball in, and as it happens, it was a great finish. But I don't think he needs to make the run so early. You can see where the ball's coming from. You can see the defenders.
Well, he should see across the line there as well. That he is offside.
Yeah, but you see that.
In 2015, the miss at the end was a little more understandable, as it was quite literally at the end of the 90th minute. The angle was worse, and it wasn't really a pass, but he still had an open net that he completely missed. And don't forget that his miss in the shootout put Argentina behind. And then there's also this. If that is anyone else, any other player for Argentina is in that position, the ball ends up in the back of the net, Argentina take the lead and probably win their first cup since 1993. But instead, this idiot got the ball, and he would miss, so the game would end up tied and once again go to penalties. Chile would step up first and miss. Sergio Romero, star of the semi-final versus the Dutch 2 years prior, shined once again as he made the stop. And as he had done 2 years prior, stepping up first for Argentina was Lionel Messi. All he had to do was score and Argentina would have the advantage, which would be huge when facing a keeper like Bravo. This is a man who had scored fanatically against the Netherlands, calmly against Colombia, and was the only Argentine to score in the shootouts the year before. Chile would win 4-2 on penalties. Argentina would lose their 3rd final in 3 years and 6th straight since 2004. Messi would hide in shame, and it really started to feel like Argentina would never be the same again. No matter what they did or who they played, they just couldn't seem to get over the final hurdle, no pun intended. Tata Martino would leave his position after the game. Messi even retired from the national team for a short while before eventually deciding to come back. They would end up going through several coaches in an attempt to qualify for the 2018 World Cup in Russia, which they barely did, but they would also have one of their worst ever tournament performances, exiting in the round of 16. Also, to finish this rant on Higuaín, with 10 minutes to go against Nigeria, tied 1-1 and facing elimination, Higuaín would get the perfect pass in the perfect place and do this. Argentina's coach, who shall remain unnamed, would leave in disgrace after the failure of 2018. In his place, an interim head coach was placed in charge, Lionel Scaloni, and if he looks familiar, it's because I've already showed you him. Yeah, that right there is him, playing on the same field as Messi in the 2006 World Cup. And look, there they are hugging right after the goal. If there was a better image of this out there, we'd be seeing it everywhere today. So this meant that Scaloni was a little different than the other coaches. He was one of the younger coaches Argentina had in a long while and was clearly familiar with both the players and the style. And even though the position wasn't necessarily permanent, his tenure would start well. He'd win 2 out of his first 3 games, tie another, and then actually lose to Brazil 1-0 in a friendly. But the lowest point definitely came in a friendly against Venezuela, where somehow Argentina lost that game 3-1. And that's with Messi playing. After this game, plenty of people were saying Scaloni would be another failure, and that we should get someone else in charge. But the 2019 Copa America was only a few months away, so Scaloni was asked to stay in the position through the end of the tournament. It didn't start well. Argentina would actually lose 2-0 to Colombia in their opening game. Things would slightly improve, if you can call it that, against Paraguay as they would tie 1-1 with help from a penalty. Then they would get a better result with a solid 2-0 win over Qatar. This was somehow enough to see them through in second place, where they would find themselves facing off against Venezuela in the quarterfinal. A rather lucky draw if you ask me. But this time Argentina was the better team and they would win 2-0. So, to the surprise of many, Argentina were in the semi-final of the tournament, and they were set to play Brazil. Not many people had hope going into this game, but Argentina honestly held their own. Brazil won, a little controversially, but still. The fact that Argentina was not only there, but actually played well, said a lot to a lot of people. In the third place match, Argentina would beat Chile 2-1, and because of this performance in the Copa, Scaloni was officially appointed as the head coach of Argentina in a permanent position. He continued to inspire the team and build its confidence, so much so that to this day, as of the time of making this video, Argentina hasn't lost since that semi-final. Spoilers, I know. But they were playing games in a way not seen from them before or really in a long time. In a friendly against Mexico, they won 4-0 with all 4 goals coming in the first half. In a different friendly against Germany, after being down 2-0, they would claw their way back into the game, ultimately tying 2-2. They even beat. One way or another, Argentina was finding ways to win, and more importantly, finding ways to not lose. The mentality of the team had changed. When they went behind, if they went behind, they always fought back. The team Scaloni was forming was not of individuals like Higuain, but of companions and friends working towards a single goal, and they would have another chance on the horizon. So remember how I said in 2016 there was a special edition of the Copa America for the 100th anniversary? That Copa was played at the same time as the Euros, which means yes, we almost had a year where both Ronaldo and Messi won it all with their national teams. And having the tournament set up like this was so liked, CONMEBOL wanted to make this a permanent change. Why they didn't just skip 2019 and play it in 2020, I don't know, money. So instead, it was decided the next edition of the Copa America would be in 2020 to match it with the Euros, and from there, it would be played every 4 years. This was also supposed to be a very special edition of the tournament co-hosted by Argentina and Colombia for some reason. Money. So basically, it was a really good chance for Argentina to finally win a trophy. But wait a minute. On one side, the hosts and current champions, Brazil. That's not El Monumental in Argentina, that's the Maracanã in Brazil. What happened here? With the outbreak of the pandemic, a decision needed to be made, and quickly. The world was shutting down, sports were being played with no fans, if they were being played at all, and on top of everything, South America was not handling the pandemic well. On March 17, 2020, coincidentally the same day I lost my job thanks to the pandemic, CONMEBOL announced the tournament was to be delayed by 1 year. This decision was mainly made because the Euros were also being delayed. In addition, both invited nations, Australia and Qatar, withdrew from the tournament, making it the first Copa America in 30 years to be played without any guests. But it wasn't that simple. 2 months later, on May 20th, Colombia was removed as co-host amongst a flurry of protests against their president. 10 days later, Argentina would also be removed due to COVID-19 related issues. This made it seem like the tournament would probably not happen at all, and we would just have to wait until 2023, because for some reason that's when the next tournament is, in order to see them play again. And unfortunately by then, it might be too late for Messi. He was getting older and was desperate to lift the cup with Argentina. But less than 24 hours after the tournament was left without a host, in an unprecedented move, CONMEBOL managed to get Brazil to host the tournament for the second time in a row. Their infrastructure was relatively set to go, and why would Brazil not want to? Every time they've hosted the tournament, they've won it all. They were current champions and felt pretty strong. And suddenly, this final chance for Messi and Argentina just got significantly harder. Brazil came out strong in this tournament. A decisive 3-0 win over Venezuela, followed by a stronger 4-0 win over Peru, quickly put them as forerunners to repeat as champions. But in their third game, this one against Colombia, they seemed to slip a little. Colombia scored first, and they were playing very well too. They would even maintain this lead until the 78th minute when Brazil tied. Then, 10 minutes of stoppage time were added. Sound familiar so far? Brazil would score in the final minute of stoppage, winning the game. In their final group stage game though, Brazil would slip again, only managing a tie against Ecuador. Also, it's worth noting by the way that they returned to the round robin style for this tournament due to the number of teams. Now, I'm not exactly sure what, but something on the Brazilian side had changed. The way they played in their first two games was completely different than the rest of the tournament. In the knockout rounds, Brazil would barely beat Chile 1-0 before heavily struggling against Peru. This was a team they had just beaten 4-0, but in the rematch that was the semi-final, Peru was the better squad, at least for large portions of the game. Brazil still won, of course, but their one goal was really the only serious chance they had in the game. Anyone paying attention would have seen that they were not the same team as 2019. Brazil were beatable. On the flip side, Argentina, though always considered favorites in the Copa America, were under heavy scrutiny. They had been tying a lot of games leading into the tournament as they seemed to struggle to put them away. In the opening match against Chile, Messi would score a phenomenal free kick, only for Chile to tie on what I still don't think is a penalty. But in all fairness, Argentina did have plenty of chances to take the lead and simply failed to do so. In their second game though, they would play Uruguay, where a 13th minute goal was the only difference, giving Argentina their first win of the tournament. And despite this win though, many were asking if the Albiceleste would be able to hold their own against a team like Brazil, or did they need to show the same dominance Brazil had in their first two games. But similar to the 2014 campaign, Argentina was playing a more defensive style. Score early, control the game. And against Paraguay, that's exactly what they did. They'd score in the 10th minute and just protect the lead. Finally, in their last group stage game against Bolivia, already having qualified for the next round and Bolivia already having been eliminated, Argentina unleashed a dominating performance, winning 4-1. So both Argentina and Brazil would top their groups, meaning the only way to play each other was in the final. But in the knockout rounds, Argentina would face Ecuador, who proved a more formidable opponent than any which came before. Despite several chances and Messi even hitting the post, the game was level for most of the first half. It wasn't until the 40th minute that Messi would find Rodrigo de Paul and they'd finally take the lead. As they had done all tournament, Argentina pulled back and held on to it. The difference being, they were able to finish their chances this time. 2 late goals, including another free kick from Messi, saw them through as 3-0 victors. So in the semi-final came Colombia. Argentina would once again score an early goal and held onto it quite well, but Colombia would do what no one else had been able to do. In the 60th minute, they'd score to tie the game. And I hold, if this exact play happened 99 more times, not a single time do they score again. This play was so perfect in timing, angles, and everything that it just worked out great for Colombia. And I'm not trying to say that as some sort of excuse or anything. No, this was a legitimately good play. Now, Argentina would have several more chances to win the game after this, but ultimately it did end in a tie, sending it straight to penalties. Colombia had just beaten Uruguay in penalties in the previous game, however this time they'd go first. Cuadrado would step up and barely get it past Argentine goalkeeper Dibu Martinez, who had only played his first game for Argentina in the qualifiers leading up to the tournament. But then came Messi, taking his first penalty in a Copa America since his terrible miss 5 years prior. Another miss, and who knows what would happen. On another side note here, I always found this really interesting. Messi smashed that ball, hitting the in-goal camera, breaking it. Later, in the shootout to decide the Euros, England's number 6 scores his penalty in a similar fashion, and the English commentator says, "Have you ever seen a penalty like that before? What a hit!" Like, yes, I have, when Messi did it a week ago. But anyway, now it was Colombia's turn again. Cuadrado hadn't gone against Uruguay, but Sanchez, the next kicker for Colombia, had. Dibu, who liked to share some trash talk, had done his homework. Advantage Argentina, as long as Rodrigo de Paul scores. But that's alright. Unlike the other misses I've shown here so far, the shootout was still tied. So up next for Colombia was Yerry Mina, who had also gone against Uruguay. And more importantly for Argentina though, in a qualifier match before the Copa, he had injured Dibu Martinez. So it came as no surprise when Dibu kept trash talking him, and once again shown he had done his homework, blocking his second in a row, leaving Yerry Mina absolutely bewildered. Third for Argentina though was Leandro Paredes, who finally gave Argentina the advantage. Now, Borja would have to step up for Colombia needing to score against a keeper who had just blocked 2 in a row. And he would. 2-2, advantage Argentina. And stepping up next was Lautaro Martinez, who had so far played a pretty fantastic tournament. Score, and Argentina are knocking on the door of their third final in 4 Copa Americas. Match point Argentina. Colombia need to score their 5th penalty, or they're out. Tasked with the responsibility of beating the man who had already stopped them twice was Edwin Cardona.
Atajó el Dibu Martínez, Argentina, la final.
It felt so good. After the failure of 2018, after almost not even qualifying, and clawing our way back up to being a formidable team, Argentina were finalists yet again. And so we end up here, in a nearly empty Maracanã, where Argentina had lost to Germany 7 years prior, against a team that had beaten them in 3 straight finals to start this horrid drought they now faced. One side, favorites to repeat, had started to stumble, the other desperate to finally win it all. But wait, this is Ángel Di María. If you remember, he scored the game-winning goal against Nigeria way back in 2008. Where has he been all this time? Despite only scoring this 1 goal in the 2014 World Cup, Di María was a very useful part of the team. He had quite the ability to control the ball in a ways others couldn't, almost dancing around opponents at times. His attacking presence was extremely important. Not only did he hit the post against Nigeria, setting up Messi's first goal of the game, but he was the attacking force against Switzerland, playing an incredible second half, and like I said, they really should have won it with his efforts. And that's why it was such a shame to see him go down hurt against Belgium in a non-contact injury nonetheless. After a beautiful pass from Messi, Di Maria took a shot and fell to the ground. And with this, he would miss the remainder of the tournament, which only hurt so much more when Argentina would play Germany in a friendly after the World Cup with Di Maria, and they would win 4-2. He would be back on the squad for the 2015 Copa America, where he managed to make it to and play in the final for 29 minutes until he was injured yet again. This meant that Messi, who was not 100% at the time, was forced to come in early, and if you remember, he ended up hurting himself as well and missed the penalty shootout. To say the least, people were a little annoyed at Di Maria. The following year in the Centenario, he would still be on the team despite many protests and would once again find himself injured, this time in the second game against Panama. And this time he suffered a groin injury. Now he would actually heal and make it back to the final, where he had to be substituted out in the 57th minute. So in 3 straight tournaments, Di Maria would be injured, leaving many to not want him on the team anymore. Though much less despised than Higuaín's, his inclusion in the 2018 World Cup squad was questionable at best, even if he did score a great goal against France. Despite this though, people still thought his time at the national level was done. But Messi wanted him there. He wanted Di Maria to be part of the squad. See, ever since he took over, Scaloni had changed the team quite a bit. Most of the players from the 2018 squad were gone. Higuaín was nowhere to be seen again, and instead we had new players like Lautaro Martinez, Lo Celso, and De Paul. Unlike previous coaches, Scaloni wasn't keeping players based on merit or name alone, but instead on their value to the team and what they could contribute. If Messi himself wasn't able to be a leader, set up goals, or score anymore, Scaloni would not put him in there. But what Scaloni did do was listen to the request of Messi and included Di Maria in both the 2019 and 2020 tournaments. Now, in 2019, Di Maria was arguably non-existent, but in 2020/21, he was one of their best players. Every single time he was on the pitch, Argentina played so much better. And this was in part due to how Scaloni was using him. Di Maria was not a perpetual starter anymore, but he was no less talented. He was starting to be used as a substitute throughout the games to bring energy, experience, and control to the Albiceleste. He did start some games. Against Paraguay, he set up the lone goal with a brilliant pass, but against Ecuador, the reason Argentina scored 2 late goals was because of him. After coming into the game, he just changed everything and actually set up the second goal directly. He was brought in after Colombia tied in the semi-final, and with a tiny bit more of luck, they would win that game before the penalties. It was obvious Di Maria was going to play a vital role in the final, whatever that role might be, whether to try and give life early in the game, or if Argentina found themselves tied later on, perhaps to bring energy and go for the win. Maybe even to help secure the win. The way Scaloni had used Di Maria helped him stay fresh, healthy, and ready all the way through the final. Which once again leads us back here, back to the 22nd minute of the game. 6 straight finals lost, 4 Copa Americas, 1 Confederations Cup, and a World Cup lost, Brazil having been their downfall in 3 of them. This was the moment that changed it all. Now, there's one more really important factor to mention, one more element that made this moment so much more special. As one of the commentators put it,
Di María, uno de los ángeles que tenemos esta noche, uno de los ángeles argentinos, el otro ángel es el gran Diego.
one of the angels that we have this night, the other angel being the great Diego. For reasons way too complicated to go into at the end of an already long video, Maradona did not play in either the 1991 nor 1993 Copa America winning squads, and after the 1994 World Cup, he'd retire from the national team. He never saw Argentina win a title again. Sure, he was there when they won the gold in 2008, just as he was when they lost to Brazil, Germany as coach, Uruguay, Germany again, Chile, and ultimately France. But in November of 2020, after suffering a cardiac arrest, Diego Armando Maradona died at the age of 60. Argentina wasn't just playing to try and end a drought. They weren't just fighting to help Messi finally lift that one elusive trophy. They didn't just want to beat a rival who had defeated them time and time again, or to bring joy to millions of fans in their country. On top of it all, they were playing for Maradona too. So now, finally, with the understanding of every loss faced, on and off the field, with the struggles of finding coaches and changing players, with the pains of just how close they came every single time. Welcome to the moment that changed it all.
La cambia larga para Di María, va a llegar Di María, llegó Di María para el gol. Di María prepara, punta, fue. ¡Gol!
As they had done all tournament, Argentina would hold on, and for the first time in 28 years, they would win. Lionel Messi would finally get to lift the trophy, and Argentina were champions yet again.
Un minuto para el final. Vamos Argentina todavía. Vamos Argentina todavía. Bien muchachos, bien. Bien muchachos, bien, vamos. Por Chiquito Romero, por Sabela. Aguante Argentina, aguante. Al partido le quedan 40 segundos. Y nos vamos a volver locos.
Esto es mucho más que fútbol para nosotros. Para todos los argentinos es mucho más que fútbol esto.
Señoras y señores, habrá tiro libre. Quedan 30 segundos. 30 segundos para sacarnos la bufa de 28 años. Gracias Ángel Di María por ese golazo. Gracias Pipe Higuaín. También es tuyo, hermano. Por estar siempre con la camiseta. Messi dice no se juega más. Habrá tiro libre. Argentina quiere ser campeón. Señoras y señores, se va a terminar.
Cuando el árbitro dice final, señoras y señores, sí, campeones, campeones, campeones.
Griten conmigo, 28 años después, gracias Dios, gracias Diego, gracias Messi. El fútbol te devuelve lo que nos ha regalado en estos últimos años. Gracias Argentina, porque somos un país de fútbol, vivimos del fútbol, nos emocionamos con el fútbol. Nos vamos de lengua con el fútbol, relatamos con el corazón, nunca con falta de respeto, siempre con el alma, siempre con el corazón. Argentina es el campeón. Un beso grande a todos en Argentina. Para nosotros nuestro partido de fútbol es mucho más. Sentimos el fútbol como nadie, amamos el fútbol en este momento tan difícil para todos los argentinos de nuestro país. Esto es un regalo fenomenal. No pudo ser en Chile, no pudo ser con Alemania, no pudo ser en Chile, en Estados Unidos. Y fue con esta banda de pibes, con el Dibu Martínez, con Leandro Paredes, con Lionel Scaloni. Argentina logra un título después de casi 30 años. Argentina campeón de América. ¡Viva el fútbol! ¡Viva Messi! Lo mereces, hermano. Gracias a estos jugadores por regalarnos un ratito, semejante emoción. Argentina 1, Brasil 0. ¡Somos campeones de América!